Hey everybody, KC here. So one of the e-newsletters that I get on a regular basis is from the Bittman Project. And it's run by Mark Bittman, who used to be the New York Times food writer. He's a chef, he's an author, does a lot of cookbooks, and the newsletter is always informative and often very, very interesting. The one I got this week is actually written by a guy named Tucker Shaw, works for Bittman. And one of the things he's doing in this newsletter is bemoaning the fact that sometimes recipes in cookbooks or magazines or newspapers or whatever sometimes can be really, really complicated. And he says he was actually part of the problem at one point because, he would edit these recipes and say, sometimes you'd say you'd have to stir something for exactly 87 seconds and you had to stir it clockwise as opposed to counterclockwise. And everything was very, very specific and I suppose scientific. But he said at the end of the day, the way people were approaching food, especially in that environment, was just so complicated that it got in the way of actually cooking, right? At the end of the day, it's about getting food on the table. It's not always about, being so specialized. Special is good, but it's not necessarily an everyday thing. And I think that's a really smart observation. And I think it specifically is relevant to supermarkets who ought to be celebrating food more. And maybe it's possible that supermarkets don't do it because they're thinking of cooking as being, esoteric or something like that, really fancy. But in fact, supermarkets from discount stores to really good specialty stores would do their customers an enormous favor if they would sort of just get out of the way, celebrate food, celebrate the pleasures of food, but sometimes the simplicity of great food. Cooking doesn't have to be that fancy. There's something wonderful about a simple bolognese on great pasta. I'm sitting here right now, and my daughter's coming over for dinner, and we're going to make linguine carbonara together. And I'm really looking forward to this. It's one of the things we love to make together, and it's great. And I'm all set. I've got my eggs. And I've got my linguine. This is from Lumo from Italy. I've got some Parmesan that I'm going to freshly grate. I've got some onions. I've got my pancetta. It's all cubed, ready to go. Maybe the most important thing, I have an empty glass and a bottle of red wine that I'm going to be opening and drinking while we're cooking and while we're chatting. And to me, this is what cooking really ought to be about. It's the ability to be in the kitchen together, connect with each other, and do it in a way that builds community, builds family, right? And there's a lot of conversation in the supermarket industry about how the research, which I totally agree with, that families that cook and eat together, the kids tend to be better adjusted, no drug problems, they get better grades. I'm not really worried about that stuff at this point. My daughter is 29 years old, but this is the stuff that carries on. It's the thing that that helps to create and sustain families. That's what supermarkets ought to be focusing on, the scientific part of it in terms of family, but also the nature of terrific food. And it's interesting. One of the things that Tucker Shaw says here is cooking at root is not an exercise in fantasy. It's a task, quotidian and necessary if you want to eat. You got to cook. And I love to eat. And one of the reasons I learned to cook is I wanted to eat food that I really, really liked. That's something that supermarkets can communicate to their customers with passion and commitment. And supermarkets, if they do it right, can do it better than anybody else. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. Have a great weekend. As always, I want to hear what's on your mind.